I speak now because the fire is low and the night is long. No one asks me to talk. They think the old man has nothing more to say. But the silence is louder now than it ever was when I was young. And silence is heavy. Heavier than spears, heavier than meat, heavier than death. So I speak. I was born in the deep frost season, when the sky cracked open and wind cut the skin like flint. My mother bled into the snow after giving birth to me. I never knew her voice. My father, he never gave me one. He only spoke to command or condemn. I grew under his shadow, and it was cold, but it taught me to see. In silence, I heard everything. The twitch of a hare's ear before it bolts, the breath of a stag in the dark, the cough of hunger in the belly of my brother. Yes, my brother. His name was Cain. He came 4 seasons after me, born in warmth. My mother was already gone. A different woman nursed him, my aunt, who died when wolves came into the camp one night and carried off a child. They never found her legs. After that, Cain drank goat's milk and gnawed dry roots, but he lived. He always lived, and he smiled. Gods, he smiled more than anyone should in a world made of stone and hunger. Where I was sharp, Cain was soft. Where I learned to carve bone into blades, he learned to trace the stars with ash on the cave walls. He had no interest in killing. Not because he feared blood, he simply did not need it the way I did. I remember watching him sit for hours, watching ants build a hill near the fire pit. He once cried when our father stomped on it. "You will never survive," our father said to him. But Cain just looked up and whispered, "They were working." The others laughed, not I. I didn't understand him, but I didn't laugh. Even then, I knew there was something inside him that mattered, something that couldn't be eaten or worn like a pelt, but something rare, something I couldn't protect. We were still boys when I made my first kill. It was during the thin moon season. Food was scarce, and the elders said we must go farther than usual. My father took me and 3 others, walking through snow so thick it swallowed the legs of trees. We tracked a herd of elk across the ridge and waited behind a blind made of pine and stone. My hands shook. I had never killed anything larger than a squirrel. The spear felt heavy, too heavy. I thought I might drop it. But then the elk came. Their breath steamed into the cold like smoke from spirit mouths. Their hooves crushed frost. And then the largest one, a bull with antlers like a tree on fire, turned his head. He looked at me. I don't know why. Maybe he felt me there. Maybe I breathed too loud. Or maybe the gods wanted me to remember that face. He stared, and I stared back. And something inside me screamed, but not in fear, in duty. I stepped forward before anyone else. I didn't wait for signal or permission. I hurled the spear. The sound it made, gods, I still hear it sometimes when I close my eyes. The thump of wet bone, the scream, the stagger. Blood sprayed across the snow, hot, steaming like spilled fire. I had done it. I had killed. My father grunted approval. The others clapped my back. That night, they roasted the liver and made me eat it first, a hunter's right. I bit into it, still warm, still pulsing with the memory of life. But Cain, he wouldn't eat. He sat by himself, near the edge of the firelight, head bowed. I went to him, still chewing. I thought he'd be proud. I thought maybe finally he'd see me as more than the shadow of our father. But he looked up at me with those eyes, so full of sadness, and whispered, "Did it look at you?" I froze, meat stuck in my teeth. I nodded slowly. He nodded back. "Then it knew, and you killed it anyway." I didn't answer. I couldn't. That was the first time I felt the weight, not of the spear, not of the elk, but of the moment after. The moment no one talks about, when the fire fades, the songs end, and the thing you killed is still dead, and you're still alive. But something has shifted, something no one can see. Cain never hunted, not once. He came with us sometimes to help carry, but he never threw a spear, never loosed a stone, never even raised his hand. He painted, he carved, he made small flutes out of bird bones. The children loved him. Even the elders grew fond of his strange ways over time. But my father never did. He's weak, he said. He will shame the line. I argued loud once. I remember grabbing my father's cloak, yelling, "He's not weak, he sees things we don't." My father struck me hard. "You're his brother, then teach him to be useful." But I couldn't teach Cain what he didn't want to learn, and I didn't know how to teach the world to make space for him. So I did what I thought was right. I protected him. When the tribe went hungry, I gave him double share. When boys mocked him, I knocked their teeth loose. When the chief asked why Cain refused the hunt, I said he was guarding the fire. I built a wall around him made of blood and silence. I never knew that the wall also kept him away from me. We grew older. I became a hunter the tribe respected. Cain became the one they tolerated, like a fire that doesn't warm but still glows. I told myself I had done my duty. I had kept him alive. I had honored our mother. But deep inside, I began to fear that I hadn't understood him, that while I fought to protect his body, I had let his soul starve. And in those days, the sky began to shift. Strange signs, star patterns never seen before, the howling of beasts deeper in the valley. The old ones muttered of omens, of war, of things worse than wolves. One morning, Cain came to me. He didn't wear paint. His hands were shaking. "I had a dream," he said, "of fire, of you bleeding, of me running. But I wasn't afraid. I was free." I laughed, nervous. "You dream strange things, brother." But he didn't laugh. "I think I must leave the camp," he whispered. I stood still. My chest tightened. "Why?" I asked. "There's danger out there, rival tribes. The ice is coming early this year." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Because if I stay, I'll die without ever living." I didn't understand. I still don't. That was the last full day I saw him. The next morning, Cain was gone, and the fire has never felt warm since. They searched for him for 3 days. 6 men, 2 dogs, and my fear. All of us wandered the snow line, calling his name like it could echo through the trees and bring him home. But the forest didn't care. The forest keeps what it takes. I found a trail the second night, shallow prints near the river bend. Not like a man walking to war, but like someone just walking. No hesitation, no panic, no pack. Just bare footprints, careful and silent, like he was trying not to wake the world. He had left on purpose, and he hadn't taken a weapon. I followed the trail as far as I could, even after the others turned back. They said it was too cold, too dark, that he wasn't worth another death. But they didn't say that in front of me. They didn't dare. I was Cain's older brother, the hunter, the one who once brought down a bear with nothing but a broken spear and a scream. They still told stories about it near the fire. But stories don't keep your brother warm. They don't tell you where he's gone, and they don't explain why the one person you tried to protect would choose to walk into the wild alone. I followed him into the gorge. That place was cursed. The elders called it Voice Splitter. a narrow, jagged crack between two frozen cliffs where sound bounced until it tore itself apart. No one went there unless they were starving, exiled, or mad. Kine went by choice. I saw the signs in the moss. I knew his step. He walked with one heel light, favoring his left. His prints curved toward high places. He was always drawn to the sky. Near the gorge, I found one of his flutes, the little bone one, carved from the wing of a crow. It was still warm. I pressed it to my lips, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could make the sound he made. Nothing came out. I sat there for hours, watching the ice drip from the ledges, watching the crows circle overhead, watching the sky change colors with no reason, like it was weeping in a language I couldn't speak. And I thought, why? Why would he leave a place with food, with fire, with me? That night I dreamed of him. He stood in front of the fire, hair full of ash, eyes calm. He said, "You taught me how to survive, but I don't want to survive, brother. I want to live." When I woke, I was crying. Not loud, just quiet tears that froze on my cheeks before they could fall. That was the last trace I found of Kine for weeks. Back at the camp, the wind had changed. The elders stopped speaking his name. The children asked where he'd gone, and their mothers pulled them away. My father sat by the fire every night, grinding his knife on stone that was already smooth. He never asked about Kine. He had already buried him in his mind. But I hadn't. I started carving his name into bark. I drew his flute in charcoal on cave walls. I told the children his stories, how he made the wounded fox follow him, how he could mimic owl calls so well even the owls answered back. I told them he was not weak, he was different. He was born into the wrong kind of tribe. But even I knew that words wouldn't bring him back. Words meant nothing without blood, without memory. So I made a choice. I stopped hunting. Not completely. I brought what was needed, but no more. I let others kill. I spent my time searching. I walked alone into valleys no one dared enter. I listened for his songs in the wind. I followed markings on stone that no one else could see. I found more flutes, tied to branches with sinew, left high up in trees. He was trying to be followed. Or maybe he was leaving messages for someone else. One night, I found a cave filled with drawings. Not of animals, not of war, but of eyes. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all staring. Some open wide with fear, some closed, some crying. In the center, two figures. One tall with a spear, one smaller with a hand held out. Above them, a fire, not burning, but crumbling. It was his work. I knew it. I felt it like a spear under the ribs. And I realized something. Kine hadn't left to escape danger. He had left to escape expectation. He didn't want to become me. And I didn't know if I should feel proud or ashamed. The tribe changed in my absence. The elders began training the younger boys early, harsher than before. Fewer songs, more drills. My father began leading hunts again. They said I was distracted, that I was still chasing the shadow of a weakling. One of them said it to my face. I broke his jaw. But even as I stood over him, fist bloody, chest heaving, I felt no pride, no vindication, just emptiness. Because maybe they were right. Maybe I should have let Kine go. But how do you let go of someone who trusted you to protect them, even if they didn't ask? There's something I never told anyone, not even Kine. When we were boys, during one of the first great winters, I found him curled in the snow outside the tent. He had wandered too far, chasing the glow of a frozen bug he thought was magic. His lips were blue, his hands stiff. I carried him back, laid him by the fire, took off my fur and wrapped him in it, stayed awake all night holding his body close to mine, praying he would breathe again.
he did, but he never remembered that night. And maybe that's why I could never stop protecting him, because I had already felt the weight of losing him once, and now I feared that this time he wouldn't come back. Seasons passed. The tribe moved south with the herds. I went with them, but I kept looking back, always watching the horizon for a figure moving through the trees, whistling through bone, smiling like he had never belonged anywhere and somehow made that sacred. But Kine never came back. Not then. Not yet.
It was the wind that told me something was wrong. Not a howl, not a scream, just a change. We had traveled far with the herds, deeper into the dark valleys between the mountains. It was land our tribe didn't know well, a place where the trees grew taller than silence, and the sky was often lost behind clouds so thick they felt like ceiling stones pressing down on your chest. I hunted less now. They said I was wasting strength, growing soft, but I couldn't stop searching. Even when I walked with the hunters, I strayed from the path. I followed markings in stone, strange arrangements of bones left near creek beds, stacked pebbles tied with thin strands of bark, things that meant nothing to anyone else. But they weren't random. Cain had left signs, not just for me, for anyone who would see, anyone still listening. That was the kind of man he was. He left behind pieces of himself, the way the moon leaves light on water, soft, fleeting, but impossible to ignore once you've seen it. Then the wind changed, and something came with it. It started with the dogs. They stopped barking. They didn't whimper, they didn't sniff. They simply froze, rigid as stones, ears forward, eyes locked on the forest beyond the camp. The kind of stillness that animals make when they know something is wrong but don't yet know where the danger hides. I felt it too. A pressure, a watching. I stood at the edge of the camp, spear in hand, staring into the black maze of pines, trying to see what the dogs saw. But there was nothing, only trees and shadow and the kind of silence that doesn't belong in living places. Then I found the tracks, fresh, not of beasts, of men, not ours. I crouched low, tracing the edge of one print, wide foot, shallow heel. They moved with care, hunters, not scouts, and not from our tribe. They weren't passing through. They were watching us. I told the elders. Most dismissed me. One of them, old Kor, narrowed his eyes and nodded. "I've heard stories," he said, "of the ash-skinned ones, those who paint their faces with soot and move like whispers through the cold. They don't trade, they don't talk, they take." I felt the cold slide deeper into my spine. "Have they taken anyone?" I asked. Kor just stared at the fire. "Only those who wander too far." That night, I didn't sleep. I sharpened my blade until my fingers ached. I checked the furs, counted our supplies, walked the perimeter 5 times. Nothing moved, nothing cried. But I dreamed. I was in the forest, alone. The trees breathed. My feet made no sound. And ahead of me, standing between 2 ancient stones, was Cain. He wore no furs, no shoes, only paint on his chest, spirals and circles drawn in red. His eyes were dark, not afraid, not warm, just watching. Behind him, shadows moved, taller than men. Their eyes glowed like coals buried in snow. They didn't chase, they waited. And Cain? He turned to walk toward them. I called out. He didn't answer. Just before he vanished, he said, not with his mouth, but with his eyes, "This was never your path to follow." I woke covered in sweat, and I knew what I had to do. I left before sunrise, carrying only my spear, a pouch of dried meat, and Cain's flute, the last one I'd found. I told no one, not this time. I walked into the forest, alone, not as a hunter, not as a brother, as something in between. The trees swallowed the sound of my steps. I moved like the wolves, low, slow, watching. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Not the bite of wind, but something older, a cold that crawled into the blood, that made the breath shallow, that whispered of bones buried beneath your feet. Then I saw it, a mark, on the bark of a dead tree, a handprint in ash, small, not painted, pressed, like someone had fallen there, or left it behind on purpose. It was Cain's size. My throat closed. I followed. The ground turned to stone and frost. No birds, no insects, just trees standing like guardians of a secret no one was meant to find. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Faint. Not campfire, not cooking. Something burnt long ago. The bitter, acrid stench of blackened earth and bones. I stepped into a clearing and froze. There, in the center, was a pile of charred wood and broken spears. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were stones painted with blood. Symbols I didn't know, not from our tribe, not from any tribe I had seen. But at the center of the ash, a piece of cloth. Cain's, the same color he wore when he vanished. I fell to my knees, not in grief, in rage, because I knew in that moment he had been here, maybe days ago, maybe hours, and he hadn't been alone, and someone or something had found him. The rest of the forest was silence, no trail, no blood, just the echo of what had happened left behind in shapes and smells and scars on trees. I stayed there until the cold started to take my fingers, and then I did something I hadn't done since the day of my first kill. I screamed, not like a hunter, like a brother. Like a man who realized too late that the path he walked may have led his own blood into the mouth of wolves, and that all his strength, all his stories, all his spears couldn't save the one person who never wanted to be saved by violence. I buried the cloth. I marked the trees. I whispered his name to the wind, and I swore to the night. If he was alive, I would find him. If he was gone, I would bring down whatever took him.
The walk back to camp felt like something dying inside me with each step. Not Cain, no. He might still be out there. I clung to that thread like frost clings to bone in early sun. But something else had died. The last fragile piece of me that still believed strength alone could keep those we love from being taken. The forest said nothing as I walked through it. The trees didn't comfort. The wind didn't sing. Everything around me felt wrong, tilted, off balance, like I'd stepped off the path of men and into the world of ghosts. When I returned to camp, the dogs growled at me, not with fear, with recognition. They smelled what I had become. My father sat by the fire, sharpening the same blade he always did, a blade worn so thin from years of grinding it that could no longer cut meat, only memory. He looked up when I entered. His eyes narrowed. "You smell like ash," he said. I said nothing. He stood, towered, still strong, even with white in his beard, a man carved from stone and storm. I had spent my life trying not to become him, and failing. "What did you find?" he asked. I dropped the cloth. He picked it up, turned it over, frowned. "His," I said. He said nothing, but something shifted in his face, a twitch, a memory, or regret. Then, quietly, "Dead?" I shook my head. "Taken." He grunted, and I saw it then, that he didn't believe Cain had been taken, not by men, not by beasts. He believed Cain had given himself to the wild, and worse, that maybe he deserved whatever fate he found. That's when the fire inside me lit. "You never saw him," I spat. "Not truly. You looked through him. You tried to crush everything in him that didn't look like you. And now you sit there sharpening a blade you no longer use, pretending you had no hand in it." His eyes flared. "Speak carefully, boy." "I'm not a boy," I said, stepping closer. "You taught me to kill, but Cain taught me to see. And now he's gone because I followed your path instead of his." We stared at each other, and for a moment, just a breath, I thought he might say something human, that he might lower the mask he wore all his life. But he turned, sat, sharpened, as if my words were leaves in the wind. That night, I packed what I needed. No one asked where I was going. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't care. I left before the moon rose. I crossed the valley in 2 days, slept under trees, ate little, thought less. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing again, the stones painted with blood, the ash in the air, Cain's cloth half buried in soot. It looped through my mind like a drumbeat, and with it came a thought I couldn't shake. What if he's still alive, but different? What if those who took him, changed him, broke him? What if I find him, but he no longer wants to be found? That was the fear worse than death. On the 3rd day, I saw them. Not faces, just shadows, flickering behind trees, far ahead, always just out of reach, moving like smoke on snow. No prints, no sound, but they were there, watching. I acted like I didn't see. I walked slower, let them get closer. And when the moment came, when I heard the faint crack of a branch behind me, I turned fast, spear ready, heart like thunder. Nothing, just trees. But the shadows were gone. I had passed their test. They were drawing me in, and I let them. By dusk, I reached the canyon. It was shaped like a scar, long and narrow, with jagged black cliffs on either side. At its base, smoke curled lazily from cracks in the stone, as if the earth itself still remembered fire. I found a trail of bones, clean, polished, arranged. Some human, some not. They led to a narrow path, a place no hunter would enter alone, not unless he had nothing left to lose. I entered. The canyon swallowed the light. Only embers flickered here, torches tucked into crevices, burning with strange fuel that hissed like meat on fire. The walls were covered in symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, claw marks, dyes, always eyes. And then I heard it, a voice. No, not words, a sound. A low chant humming through the stone like thunder held captive. It echoed in my ribs, my knees weakened. But I walked. Then I saw them. Figures around a fire, faces painted black with ash, bodies wrapped in bone and hide. They stood in a circle, silent, watching. In the center, a man knelt, his back to me, his hair long, matted with red clay. Paint spiraled across his skin. He was chanting. And the sound? It was the song Cain used to hum when we were children. I stepped forward. "Cain," I whispered. He turned, and everything inside me broke. It was him,
but not. His face was leaner, eyes deeper, older, not with years, with something else, with distance, as if he had traveled not just across land, but through some invisible wall that separated who he was from who he now had to be. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't run to me. He looked into my eyes and said, "You should not be here." I felt the spear slip in my hand. "You're alive," I said. I thought they took you." "They did not take me," he said, standing slowly. "I walked here." "But Cain, they kill outsiders." He nodded. "They kill threats, not questions." I stepped closer. "Come home." He shook his head. "This is my home now. They listen. They see me." I felt something tear inside. "You left me," I said, voice cracking. "I searched. I bled. I fought for you." He stepped forward, placed his hand on my chest. "You fought for who I was, brother, but not for who I am." And that's when the fire inside me, the fury that had burned since the moment I found that cloth in the ashes, turned cold. I realized Cain wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't lost. He had chosen this. He had chosen not me. I don't remember what I said next. I only remember walking out of the canyon, past the stone eyes, the chanting fire, the watchers in ash. None of them stopped me. They knew I would not return. And I didn't. But I kept the flute, his last gift. I wear it now around my neck, every day. Not to remember what I lost, but to remember what I never truly understood. Some people are not meant to be saved, only seen.
When I returned to the tribe, the sky was heavy with snow. But it didn't fall. It hovered, a stillness too large, too thick, as if the heavens were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. And I, walking beneath it, felt like an intruder in a world that no longer spoke my language. I had no blood on me, no kill to show, no words to offer, only the flute around my neck, Kron's last shape in this world. The children watched me from behind the tents, wide-eyed, unsure. The dogs didn't bark. Even the wind refused to whistle through the trees. My father stood near the fire. He was older than when I left, not in body, in posture. He didn't stand tall anymore. He leaned, just slightly, like the weight of everything he'd refused to carry had finally begun to rot his spine. I walked past him without a word. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask. That night, they asked me to speak. Not the elders, the young ones. The ones who had listened to my stories before, who had believed I could fight off anything. They sat close, shoulders touching, eyes lit not by hope, but by something more dangerous, expectation. They wanted victory, redemption, closure. But I had nothing to give them. So I spoke the truth. "I found him," I said. Silence. "He is alive." A gasp somewhere, then quiet again. He chose to walk away from the path we live, and I followed, thinking I could bring him back, but I was wrong. Someone whispered, "Was he taken?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "We took him. All of us, with our rules, our walls, our refusal to see him." I paused. He found a people who listen, who allow, who do not force the spirit to kill in order to belong. One of the boys frowned. "But they're murderers." I looked into the fire. "So are we." That ended the gathering. They drifted away, confused, unsettled. The truth doesn't warm like a story. It burns, and not in the way they want. It doesn't have heroes, only people who bleed quietly,
and leave behind flutes instead of footprints. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the edge of camp, past the last torches, into the open dark where Khan would have stood when he first chose to leave. I sat, alone, and I waited for the snow. But it still wouldn't fall, as if even the sky was afraid of what I had become. My father approached in the early hours. I didn't turn to him. I didn't speak. For a while, neither did he. Then, quietly, "You saw him?" I nodded. Was he changed? Yes. Was he ours? I shook my head. He never was. Silence. Then, "I tried to make you strong." "I know," I said. "It was all I knew." "I know that too." He sat beside me. For the first time in my life. We didn't speak again for hours, but it was enough. The flute around my neck grew heavy, not with grief, with memory, with the realization that some legacies don't pass from father to son or brother to brother. They pass sideways, through those we fail to protect, through those we never truly saw. The next morning, the sky broke. Snow fell like silence made visible, thick, slow, endless. The tribe didn't hunt that day. They sat inside their shelters. They warmed bones. They stitched skins. And I sat by the fire, sharpening a spear I knew I wouldn't throw again. I was no longer the hunter they remembered. And Khan was no longer the brother I'd lost. He was the question we never dared ask. But I still hear his song. Sometimes in the trees. Sometimes in my chest when I wake before the dawn. Not as a ghost, not as regret, but as a thread pulling me forward, reminding me that we are more than what we kill. And sometimes the bravest path is the one that walks away.
There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from the world around you, but from inside. It doesn't arrive suddenly, like fear, or drift in gently, like snow. It settles, like ash. It fills the cracks in your bones, coats your breath, dulls your thoughts. It tells you you did what you could, and then asks why it wasn't enough. I have lived in that silence ever since I returned, not as punishment, as truth. They don't look at me the same anymore. The boys who once followed me on hunts now practice with other men. They listen to warriors who still walk with pride, who still carry their spears like extensions of their rage. I don't blame them. No one follows a hunter who returns without meat, without answers, without the brother he swore to protect. I still hunt sometimes, small things, rabbits, birds. The old habits live in the joints long after the purpose fades. But now when I step on snow, I don't think about the trail. I think about Kyan's feet, bare in the frost, walking toward a different life I never dared to imagine. And I wonder, was it bravery to leave, or cowardice? And worse, was I the coward for never following fully? The elders avoid me now. They say little, and when they speak, it is only of necessity. I'm no longer asked to teach, to guide, to lead. And I accept it. They still whisper his name, not aloud, but in the way they hesitate when I enter, in the way they glance at the flute around my neck, in the way they tell the children not to walk too far from camp, lest they end up like him. They think he abandoned us. They think he betrayed the blood. They don't say it aloud, but they believe it. Because believing otherwise would mean looking at themselves, at what we forced him to become just to survive. And I've looked deep, ugly, long. There was a night, a moonless one, when I went to the edge of the frozen river. I took the flute from my neck and held it over the ice. I don't know if I meant to let it go, to cast away what little I had left to him, to stop the memories from echoing through my ribs every time the wind blew soft. But I didn't drop it, because I realized something that night. I didn't carry the flute because I missed him. I carried it because I failed him. And I needed to remember that failure every day, because forgetting it would mean lying to myself again. I remember the night he was born. Not his cries. I was too young to understand what they meant. But I remember my father's silence, the way he stared at the small bundle of life wrapped in hide and said only, "Too small." Like he was already measuring the boy against the weight of the world. And Cain never had a chance to be anything else. We carved him into a shape we needed and punished him when he didn't fit. That is what I know now, and that is what I will never allow again. There's a boy in the tribe now, no more than 10 winters. Quiet, soft hands. He draws instead of drills. He sings instead of throws. The others mock him, the way they mocked Cain. One of the elders told me to harden him, make him a man, he said. I didn't answer. Instead, I took the boy with me the next day, not to hunt, to listen. We sat near the edge of the trees and said nothing for hours. We watched the birds, the breeze in the branches, the way the sky shifts when no one's trying to bend it. He smiled, and for a moment, so did I. Not because I saw Cain in him, but because I saw what Cain might have been had he been allowed to just be. I think about the meaning of strength now, not the kind that kills, the kind that stops, that listens, that allows softness to exist in a world that praises only bone and blood. I once thought I was strong because I protected Cain, but I see now true strength would have been standing beside him, not in front, letting the world hear his voice instead of mine, letting him live, not just survive. My father died 2 winters ago. He didn't speak in his final days. His hands twitched in sleep like he was always chasing something he couldn't catch. He never said Cain's name again, and I never forced him to. When I buried him, I placed Cain's first flute beside him in the ground, not as a gift, as a witness, so that even in death my father would not be alone with the version of the world he created. Sometimes I wonder what Cain would say now if he saw me sitting by this fire, older, slower, still wearing the scars of a life carved in silence. Would he forgive me? Would he call me blind? Would he see that I finally understand? I don't know. I will never know. But I do know this. I was the hunter, and I was not enough. Not to save him, not to understand him, but maybe I can be enough now to protect the next one, not with spears, but with space.
It was in the thawing season that I found the cave, not by plan, by mistake. I had gone after a wounded deer. Its leg snapped from a trap set by careless hands. I had no hunger that day. I only wanted to end its suffering. Some part of me still needed to believe I was more than the blade I once carried. The deer bled into the moss and collapsed beneath an overhang of rock. When I knelt beside it, I saw something behind the roots, a narrow crack in the earth, half covered by vines and thyme. I pushed through. What I stepped into was not just stone.
It was a memory I had never lived, but one that belonged to me all the same. The walls breathed, not literally, but in the way they held warmth, voice, presence. Flickers of charcoal danced across every surface, spirals, rivers, stars, fire, and faces. So many faces. Some were drawn with beauty, others with agony, all of them watching. Then I saw it, near the far end, barely lit by the outside glow. 2 figures. One tall, strong, with a spear in hand. The other smaller, bent, with one hand extended toward the stars. There was no battle between them, no embrace, only distance and silence. Between the figures, Cayenne had drawn a fire, but not one made of flame. It was drawn with ashes, streaked with blackened dust and smudged by fingertips, not painted to burn, painted to die. I sat before that wall for what felt like an entire day. The deer behind me had gone still long ago. But the cave held me, not with warmth, with reckoning. Because for the first time, I didn't look at the figure with the spear and think of myself as strong. I looked at him and saw fear, not of enemies, not of beasts, of losing control, of not knowing who he is if he isn't the protector. And I realized something Cayenne must have known far earlier than I ever did. Some people protect out of love, others out of fear of being left behind. And maybe I wasn't protecting Cayenne at all. Maybe I was clinging to him as the last part of me that hadn't been hardened into stone. There were words in the cave too, etched into the wall in small carvings, written in symbols we used only in sacred ritual. Roughly translated, they read, "You kept me safe, but not seen." I couldn't breathe. My chest ached like a wound freshly opened. I had come here expecting to find memory, but I had found a message, left for me, not in anger, not even in sorrow, but in truth. Cayenne had known I would come, someday. He had written the words for me to read when I was finally ready, and I hated how long it had taken. I stayed in that cave until night fell. I lit a small fire at the entrance, not to warm myself, not to see, to listen, to let the fire speak for once instead of me. It crackled softly, and in the silence I heard Cayenne's voice. Not literal, not ghost, just presence. That same hum he used to make when he carved, low, rhythmic, patient. The hum of someone who belonged to the world, not through conquest, but connection. And I realized I had spent my whole life killing to belong, and he had simply lived. I took nothing from the cave, not even a stone. It wasn't mine to take. But before I left, I added one thing. I knelt beside the fire on the wall, and with blackened fingertips drew a third figure, sitting between the two. No weapons, no hands raised, just listening. When I returned to the camp, I didn't speak for 3 days, not out of grief, out of peace, because something had quieted inside me, not in defeat, but in understanding. Cayenne had never asked to be saved. He had asked to be heard, and I had never said the words he needed until now. That night, I took the flute from around my neck, and I played it, for the first time, not in mourning, not in pain, but in presence. And I swear to you, for a breath, a moment, a heartbeat, the wind paused, the trees leaned in, the sky lifted, and my brother sat beside me, not as a memory, as a truth.
I no longer sleep with a spear beside me. The dangers are still there. The cold still bites, the wolves still hunt, the world still bleeds. But something in me has shifted. I used to keep the spear close, not because I feared the outside, but because I feared what was inside me if I didn't have it. Now, I sit with children by the fire and speak of winds and trees, not war. I listen more than I speak. And when I do speak, I do not raise my voice like thunder, as my father once did. I let silence hold space, because sometimes silence is the only language that speaks truth. They still ask me about Cayenne. Not as often, but enough. Did he really walk away from everything? No, I say. He walked towards something else. They tilt their heads. They want more. They want stories of danger, survival, rescue. But I give them stories of paint, of ash, of footsteps in the snow that no one else followed because they were too busy proving themselves. And I tell them this: your spirit is not a spear to be sharpened. It is a path, and some paths don't lead to the hunt. Sometimes they understand, sometimes they don't, but they remember, and that's enough. There's a girl now, maybe 12 winters, who climbs the same high rock every morning before sunrise. She sings to the birds. She draws maps in the dirt. The others call her strange. I call her alive. I leave food near her fire when no one's looking. Not because she needs protection, but because I know what it's like to be almost seen and left in the shadow of someone else's idea of who you should be. My hands tremble now when I tie knots. My knees crack when I kneel. But I do it anyway. Every morning I walk to the edge of camp and press my palm into the same tree. The bark is worn smooth now, shaped by memory. And I whisper, still here. Not to Cayenne, to myself. Because staying is not weakness, and walking away is not failure. They are both ways of living. I have not seen Cayenne again, not with my eyes. But sometimes, when I walk through the pines, I hear bone flutes in the wind. I hear that low hum he always carried, the one that said, I am here and I am enough. And in those moments, I no longer feel like the hunter who couldn't save his brother. I feel like the brother who finally saw. There is a final story I will one day tell the tribe. Not yet, but one day. It begins like this. There were once two brothers, one who knew how to survive, and one who knew how to feel. And both of them were trying to keep the other from breaking. Tonight, the fire burns low. I sit alone, but I am not lonely, because I carry Cayenne with me, not as grief, not as guilt, but as guidance. He does not walk beside me. He walks within. Every time I choose to listen instead of command, every time I sit instead of chase, every time I see someone for who they are, not what I want them to be, he is there. I was once the hunter who believed strength could save everyone, but now I am the brother who knows that love is quieter than we were ever taught. And Cayenne still walks with me, not in footprints, but in how I walk. There is a final story I will one day tell the tribe. Not yet, but one day. It begins like this. There were once two brothers, one who knew how to survive, and one who knew how to feel, and both of them were trying to keep the other from breaking. Tonight, the fire burns low. I sit alone, but I am not lonely, because I carry Cayenne with me, not as grief, not as guilt, but as guidance.
He does not walk beside me. He walks within. Every time I choose to listen instead of command, every time I sit instead of chase, every time I see someone for who they are, not what I want them to be, He is there. I was once the hunter who believed strength could save everyone, but now I am the brother who knows that love is quieter than we were ever taught. And Cayenne still walks with me, not in footprints, but in how I walk.